Last week I installed SteamOS 3.8 on my Ryzen PC, and in today's video I'm going to give you the exact same honest truth that I understood after actually going through this experience myself. A lot of videos only tell you the good parts because there is hype or sponsorships involved, but today I am going to tell you straight up whether SteamOS 3.8 can genuinely replace Windows or not, and whether you should try this on your own Ryzen PC or not. Watch till the end because I'm going to walk you through my entire experience step by step, along with the problems I actually ran into. Let me first give a bit of background so new viewers understand what SteamOS actually is. SteamOS is Valve's own operating system built on Arch Linux, and it was originally designed for the Steam Deck. But Valve has gradually stopped limiting this operating system to just the Steam Deck, and with version 3.8, released this June, Valve officially confirmed that you can now install SteamOS on your own custom-built gaming PC, essentially the same way Valve's upcoming Steam machine will run it. This was pretty exciting news for me because I had been hearing for a while that SteamOS was coming to custom PCs, and once it became official, I decided why not try it myself. Now here's an important point that a lot of people do not know. Right now, SteamOS is only compatible with AMD GPUs, meaning if your system has an Nvidia graphics card installed, you cannot install SteamOS on it yet. Since my system runs a Ryzen processor along with an AMD graphics card, I did not run into any installation-related issues. If you have a Ryzen CPU, but an Nvidia GPU installed, you will need to wait a bit longer because Valve has confirmed they are working on expanding Nvidia support, but it is not available right now. Let's talk about the installation process, since this is the first thing everyone wants to know about. I followed the instructions from Valve's official support page, where it is clearly stated that custom PC installs are still in beta. This means the process is not entirely polished or foolproof yet, and if you're the type of person who gets nervous around technical issues, you should proceed a bit cautiously. Only the Steam Deck, the upcoming Steam machine, and the Lenovo Legion Go S have official powered by SteamOS status, while everything else, including the ASUS ROG Ally, the Ally X, the original Legion Go, and other AMD-powered handhelds, falls under beta support. Custom desktop PCs fall into this same beta category. The very first challenge I faced during installation was disabling Secure Boot. As I discussed in a previous video, Secure Boot is a firmware lock that verifies boot security, but it is not compatible with SteamOS, so you need to manually go into your BIOS and turn it off. This process differs slightly depending on your motherboard, so if you are planning to try this, check your motherboard's official website to find exactly where the Secure Boot option is. In my case, it was fairly straightforward. I went into the BIOS boot settings, found the option, and disabled it within a couple of minutes. Once Secure Boot was disabled, I wrote the SteamOS recovery image onto a USB drive and booted from it. Here too, I noticed that the entire process was quicker and cleaner compared to installing Windows, because SteamOS is an immutable system, meaning the core operating system files are read only, which makes it more stable and secure. The whole installation took me around 20 to 25 minutes, which was less time than I had expected. Now let's talk about the thing that matters most, the actual performance and experience. When I first entered game mode on SteamOS 3.8, I immediately felt how similar it is to the Steam Deck's interface, but running on the power of desktop hardware. Controller navigation, the quick access menu, and the overall UI feel completely console-like, which will appeal to people who want to use their PC in a living room setup with a big TV. SteamOS 3.8 has also added initial support for the Steam machine in this version, confirming that Valve is no longer limiting itself to the Steam Deck and is instead building out an entire ecosystem. In terms of performance, the biggest improvement I noticed was the drop in controller input latency. According to Valve, handheld controller input latency has been reduced from 5 to 8 milliseconds down to just 100 to 500 microseconds on supported non-deck handhelds. This is a massive technical improvement that makes a real difference in fast-paced games, especially competitive shooters and fighting games where every millisecond matters. If you regularly play games with a controller, you will definitely notice this improvement. Let's talk about desktop mode too, because SteamOS 3.8 brings a fairly big update here as well. Desktop mode now runs KDE Plasma 6, 4, 3, and uses Wayland as the default display server instead of the previously used X11. This change significantly improves display handling, HDR support, variable refresh rate, and TV scaling. I connected my system to an external monitor to test this out, and the difference was clearly visible, especially when I used a monitor that supports VRR, where screen tearing was noticeably reduced. If you dock your Steam Deck or SteamOS PC to a monitor or TV, this update is going to be especially useful for you. Another thing I noticed was the update to SteamOS's underlying system base. It now runs on an updated Arch Linux base and Linux kernel 6. 16, which improves overall stability and hardware compatibility. New graphics drivers are also part of this update, which especially improve performance in newer games. I tried a few demanding titles, and overall frame rates felt fairly consistent, though I want to be clear that this was not a scientific benchmark test, just my personal experience. Now let's talk about the things that maybe nobody else is going to tell you, and this is exactly why I titled this video Honest Truth. The first issue I ran into was compatibility with certain specific hardware components. Since SteamOS is still in beta for custom PCs, not every Wi-Fi chipset, Ethernet card, or sound card automatically works. In my case, Wi-Fi worked completely fine, but I had a minor issue with one of my USB accessories that used to work perfectly on Windows without any trouble. This is a reminder that if you use unusual or niche hardware, you need to check compatibility before jumping in. The second big issue, which could be a deal breaker for a lot of gamers, is anti-cheat compatibility. Since SteamOS disables secure boot, it does not support kernel-level anti-cheat systems used by companies like EA and Activision in their competitive games. This means that if you regularly play competitive multiplayer games, such as popular battle royales or tactical shooters, those games may either not run at all on SteamOS or throw an anti-cheat error before even launching. This is something I experienced myself. One of my favorite competitive games simply refused to launch when I tried it on SteamOS, and I had to switch back to Windows to play it. So if competitive gaming is your priority, making SteamOS your primary system right now would be a fairly risky decision. The third issue I noticed is the overall limitation of the software ecosystem. On Windows, you can find pretty much every kind of software, whether it is for creative work, professional applications, or specialized tools. Since SteamOS is Linux-based and primarily designed for gaming, if you use your PC for anything beyond gaming, such as video editing or some specific Windows-only software, you may run into issues. Desktop mode does let you do quite a lot, and you can even run some Windows applications through compatibility layers, but the experience is not as seamless as it is on Windows. Now let me tell you about the good things that came with SteamOS 3.8 that genuinely impressed me. First, boot time. SteamOS boots significantly faster. Compared to Windows, my system is fully ready in around 10 to 15 seconds, compared to the 1 to 2 minutes it usually took on Windows. Second, since this is an immutable system, updates feel a lot safer and more reliable because the risk of core system files getting corrupted is much lower. Third, in terms of battery life, if you use SteamOS on a handheld device, it delivers better battery efficiency compared to Windows, as confirmed by several reports showing that devices like the ROG Ally, Legion Go, and MSI Claw get longer battery life on SteamOS than on Windows 11. Another thing I appreciate is Valve's overall approach with this update. Previously, SteamOS followed a rolling release model, meaning new updates arrived fairly quickly without much testing. But Valve has now changed this approach and adopted a stable snapshot model where Arch packages are frozen and tested for months before release. This means you will run into fewer bugs, but you will also be slightly behind on some of the cutting-edge features that other gaming Linux distributions like Bazzite or CachyOS tend to implement much sooner, such as the new LAVD CPU scheduler, which has only just arrived on SteamOS as preliminary support, while it was already available on other distros earlier. Along the same lines, I also want to mention that if you use third-party plugins like Decky Loader for customization on your SteamOS setup, it is a good idea to wait a week after a major update before trying them again, because big OS changes like this often break these third-party tools until they get updated themselves. I actually made this mistake myself, trying my favorite plugin right after the update, and it simply did not work. So keep this in mind if you are into customization as well. Let's go a little deeper and understand why this SteamOS 3.8 update is considered such a big deal. When I looked at the changelog Valve published on their official Steam news page, I realized that custom PC support is not the only part of this update. There are plenty of other important changes that directly affect the experience for users like me. Bluetooth Wake has been restored for the Steam Deck LCD model after not working properly for a while, and Wi-Fi performance has also been improved for the Steam Deck OLED. These small details show that Valve is not only focused on new features, but continues to maintain and improve older devices as well. Another interesting thing I noticed is that SteamOS 3.8 now supports waking the system from sleep using the Steam controller. This sounds like a small thing, but if you use a Steam controller in your setup, this convenience turns out to be quite useful, since previously you had to rely on some other input device to wake the system. Along with this, the speed of future OS updates on high-speed connections has also been substantially improved, meaning the next time a new SteamOS update arrives, it will download and install noticeably faster than before. I also saw that SteamOS 3.8 comes with a BIOS update for the Steam Deck LCD that adds preliminary hibernation support. This is a feature that is fairly rare to see on Linux-based handhelds because it is technically quite difficult to implement. If this feature becomes fully stable going forward, it will mean you can put your device into standby while saving battery without fully shutting it down, which would be a big quality of life improvement, especially for people who use their device while traveling. Now let me tell you a bit more about the Steam Machine, since the custom PC support in SteamOS 3.8 is directly connected to this upcoming hardware. Valve has added initial support for its new Steam Machine with this update, and this announcement has created quite a stir across the gaming community. On Reddit and other gaming forums, people are speculating that Valve is finally entering the living room gaming PC market, acting as a bridge between console and PC. Since the Steam Machine will also run SteamOS, the experience I explored on my custom Ryzen PC is essentially the same experience future Steam Machine owners will get, except they will not have to go through the hassle of installing it themselves, since the device will come with SteamOS pre-installed. It is also worth mentioning that the Lenovo Legion Go S is currently the only third-party handheld officially available on the market with powered by SteamOS status, meaning you can buy this device with SteamOS already installed without doing any installation yourself. Other devices like the Asus ROG Ally series and the original Legion Go currently fall under beta support, where users need to install SteamOS themselves in a similar way to what I did on my custom PC. I want to clear up one more thing here that confuses a lot of people, and that is TDP control and battery performance on handheld devices. SteamOS 3.8 has added TDP, or thermal design power, control for several third-party handhelds, such as the Asus ROG Xbox Ally series. This means users can now manually adjust their device's power consumption to balance battery life and performance according to their own preference. This feature has been available on Windows for a while, but it is a new addition on SteamOS that is proving to be quite valuable for handheld gamers. Let's talk about the comparison everyone wants to know about: SteamOS versus Windows for overall gaming experience. My honest opinion is that if we are only talking about raw performance and frame rates, the two operating systems have gotten quite close to each other, especially for AAA titles that run well through the Proton compatibility layer. But Windows is still more flexible for general purpose use, where you can install pretty much any software without running into issues. SteamOS, on the other hand, is ahead in that console like simplicity and focus, where you boot up straight into a gaming interface without any unnecessary background processes consuming system resources. Another thing I experienced was the performance of Proton, which is Valve's compatibility layer that lets Windows games run on Linux-based SteamOS. I was pleasantly surprised to see that a lot of popular single-player games, especially open-world and story-driven titles, ran completely seamlessly, and at times I honestly forgot I was even using Linux. But as I mentioned earlier, games that use kernel-level anti-cheat remain the biggest challenge for the system, and I do not think this issue is going to be resolved anytime soon, since it is more of a policy matter for the anti-cheat companies rather than something Valve has control over. I also want to mention that if you are a content creator who records or streams your gameplay, SteamOS 3.8 has made improvements in this area too. Game mode now has better support for screencasting, which is useful for applications like OBS and Discord. There was also an issue where sessions used to crash while recording gameplay with certain maximum video height settings, and that has now been fixed as well. These small details show that Valve understands the diverse needs of its user base, whether they are casual gamers, competitive players, or content creators. One last technical detail I want to share is about virtual machine support. SteamOS 3.8 now offers initial support for running as a virtual machine guest through Vertio guest drivers. This is useful for developers and enthusiasts who want to test SteamOS without using their actual hardware, or who want to try SteamOS inside their existing Windows setup as a virtual machine without the hassle of dual booting or a separate installation. There's another angle worth talking about here, which is how this whole beta rollout reflects Valve's broader strategy of testing things quietly with a small group of enthusiasts before pushing them out to a wider audience. Custom PC support did not just appear overnight, it followed months of internal testing. Beta builds numbered 3, 7, and 3, 8, 8, and gradual expansion of the hardware support list. This kind of staged rollout means that by the time a feature reaches you as a stable release, most of the obvious bugs have already been caught by people running preview builds. It also means that if you want the absolute newest features the moment they exist, joining a beta channel is the way to go, but you have to accept a higher chance of running into something broken. I also want to talk a bit about how this affects people who are not hardcore gamers, but just want a simple, low-maintenance computer for everyday browsing and light gaming. For that kind of user, SteamOS 3.8 actually makes a fairly compelling case. Because the system is immutable, there is very little chance of it slowly getting cluttered with junk files, broken registry entries, or mysterious background processes eating up your CPU the way Windows installations sometimes do after a year or two of daily use. Every time you boot up, You are essentially getting the same clean, predictable state, which appeals to people who just want their computer to work without constantly troubleshooting it. On the flip side, I want to be fair and mention a few smaller annoyances that did not break my experience, but were still worth noting. Setting up Bluetooth accessories took slightly more effort than it does on Windows, where pairing is usually a single-click process. On SteamOS, I had to dig into desktop mode settings a couple of times to get a peripheral to reconnect properly after a restart. It was not a deal breaker, but it is the kind of small friction that reminds you this is still a beta experience on non-Valve hardware. I also spent some time testing how well SteamOS handles multitasking in desktop mode, since a lot of people who dock their handhelds or build a SteamOS PC still want to browse the web, check email, or handle basic file management alongside gaming. With Wayland now the default, window snapping, multi-monitor setups, and general desktop responsiveness all felt noticeably smoother than what I remember from earlier SteamOS versions that still relied on X11. If you have used a modern Linux desktop environment before, this will feel familiar and comfortable. If this is your first time touching Linux at all, there is a small learning curve, but nothing that a day or two of regular use will not solve. Something else worth mentioning is how Valve is clearly using the Steam Deck and third-party handhelds as a testing ground before the Steam machine actually lands in people's living rooms. Every fix that goes into controller support, every improvement to sleep and wake behavior, and every driver update is effectively being battle-tested on existing hardware first. By the time the Steam machine ships, it will be running on a version of SteamOS that has already absorbed months of real-world feedback from Deck owners, Legion Go S users, and people like me running it on custom Ryzen builds. That is a smart way to de-risk a brand new piece of hardware before it reaches a mass audience. I think it is also fair to mention pricing and accessibility as part of this honest truth, since that is genuinely one of the biggest advantages SteamOS has going for it. Unlike Windows, which requires a paid license unless it comes bundled with your hardware, SteamOS is completely free to download and install on your own PC. For anyone who has an older AMD-based gaming rig lying around, or who is building a new system anyway, this means you can experiment with an entirely different gaming experience without spending a single extra rupee, which makes trying it out a genuinely low-risk decision. Before wrapping up, let me leave you with a practical checklist if you are seriously considering doing this yourself. Confirm your GPU is AMD, since Nvidia support simply is not there yet. Check your motherboard manual for exactly where the secure boot toggle lives in your BIOS, since every manufacturer hides it in a slightly different menu. Back up anything important on that drive before you start, because installing any new operating system always carries some risk of data loss. And if at all possible, set up a dual boot rather than wiping Windows entirely, at least for your first few weeks with SteamOS, so you always have a safety net while you figure out whether this fits your gaming habits. Let me share my final thoughts on this entire experience now. SteamOS 3.8 is a genuinely impressive update that shows Valve is serious about its long-term vision. This is not just a small incremental update, it is a clear signal that the company is trying to build a proper alternative to Windows for gaming PCs. My experience with it on my Ryzen PC was overall positive, despite the handful of limitations I have openly discussed in this video. I also want to say that if you think SteamOS is going to fully replace Windows within a year or two, you should be a bit cautious about that expectation. This transition is not going to happen overnight, because Windows' software ecosystem, driver support, and enterprise adoption are so vast that challenging it will take time. But based on the pace at which Valve has been improving things over the last year or two, I can confidently say that after a few more updates, SteamOS is going to become even more mature, and at least a couple of the current limitations like Nvidia support or anti-cheat compatibility could potentially get resolved in future updates. If you ask me for simple advice on whether you should convert your primary system to SteamOS right now, my straightforward answer would be to wait a little longer if you heavily depend on competitive multiplayer games. But if you mostly play single-player and story-based games, this is absolutely worth trying, especially since it is completely free and you can keep your existing Windows installation safe through a dual boot setup. So that was my complete, honest experience installing SteamOS 3.8 on my Ryzen PC. Overall, I have been quite impressed with this update, especially the speed and polish that Valve has added in this version. It shows that Valve is genuinely serious about taking its SteamOS ecosystem beyond the Steam Deck. And with the upcoming Steam machine, this is going to become even clearer in terms of what the company's vision actually is. If you found this video useful, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss it whenever we cover a new SteamOS update or news about the Steam machine in the future. Let me know in the comments whether you have ever tried SteamOS on your own PC, and if so, how your experience went. If you have any questions about the installation process or about compatibility with any specific hardware, leave them in the comments, and I will try to answer them in a future video. I also want to say that this is a pretty exciting time in the world of technology because Windows' dominance over gaming PCs is being seriously challenged for the first time like never before. Whether you're a Windows fan or someone leaning towards Linux, this competition ultimately benefits end users since companies now have to work harder to make their products better. I hope you enjoyed this honest review. If you cannot decide whether you should try SteamOS or not, my simple advice is that if you have a spare drive or partition available, go ahead and try it. Because in the worst case scenario, you can always switch back to Windows. And in the best case scenario, you might get a fresh and refreshing gaming experience that you end up liking even more than Windows. One more thing I want to touch on is thermal and noise behavior, since this is something reviewers rarely talk about, but that I personally care about a lot when building a gaming PC that sits near my desk. Running SteamOS on the same hardware that previously ran Windows, I noticed my system generally stayed a touch cooler under sustained gaming loads, which in turn meant the fans spun up less aggressively. I cannot say for certain how much of this comes down to the leaner background footprint of an immutable, gaming-focused OS versus Windows constantly running background services, telemetry, and various startup programs, but the difference was noticeable enough that I thought it was worth mentioning here. I also want to briefly address a question I have already seen a few people asking in advance, which is whether this whole SteamOS on custom PC trend is going to push game developers to optimize more seriously for Linux going forward. Historically, Linux gaming support from major studios has been fairly inconsistent, with a lot of titles relying entirely on Valve's Proton layer to work at all, rather than getting native Linux versions. If SteamOS custom PC adoption keeps growing the way it has this year, and especially once the Steam machine actually ships to a wider audience, there's a reasonable chance we will see more publishers paying closer attention to Linux compatibility testing before launch, if only to avoid a wave of negative reviews from this expanding user base. That said, this is speculation on my part rather than something Valve has confirmed, so treat it as an educated guess rather than a promise. Until then, take care of yourself, keep exploring your systems, and I will see you in the next video with a brand new topic. Thank you for watching this video and for supporting the channel.